Hey guys, welcome to another episode of TFB TV. Today we don't have too much of an interesting background here. We've got Tapaya Wazir Akbar Khan with this big flag on top of it, which is a huge flag made in India, pretty interesting. But for today's episode, let me just see if this helicopter makes any noise around here. But for today's episode, I want to talk about sort of small arms in Afghanistan from the standpoint of a cultural and historical perspective, and what I've learned since I've been here about a number of the facts about small arms here, just from cultural stuff, ethnography stuff, safety stuff, that kind of thing. But before we get into that, real quick, I just want to explain to you all, since some of you are curious for some reason about why I'm in Kabul. Well, first of all, I have nothing to do with the U.S. government here, nothing to do with the U.S. Embassy here. That was last year, and the State Department actually fired me. But anyways, I'm here with a company called Tech Nation, and this is a small company. It's a technology company that's working on various technology conferences and stuff like that in Afghanistan. They're pretty interesting. They have a number of different subsidiaries, such as Tech Women, Tech Kid, and etc. But I've been working on their YouTube channel. And I've been working with 3 all-star girls, which I would like to introduce to you real quick. These girls literally went from absolutely nothing, knowing nothing about Premiere Pro, videography or photography, and editing about 2 months ago when I first got here. And now they're to the point where they're actually making videos on their own, and they're actually doing stuff on their own, which is really fascinating, been really amazing to watch behind the scenes. These 3 girls have been awesome videographers and editors, and I just want to give a shout out to them. And if you guys want to help out our channel on that side, please give us a little bit of a subscribe. It's called Tech TV Afghanistan. Just simply write it in there on YouTube. Thank you very much. Tashakkur, khayli mamnoon. All right, so getting into the details here. You've got a lot of citizens in Kabul, a lot of Afghans who have illegal guns. And I'll talk a little bit about the registration here, right? So when I say a lot of people here have illegal firearms, I'm not talking about criminals and mafia folks. I'm talking about everyday folks who want to protect themselves. A lot of businessmen, a lot of entrepreneurs, that sort of thing. And so how that works to go about registering a firearm here and getting a firearms permit is, the thing to realize is Afghanistan is a very communal society, right? So what you have to do is you have to get 2 government officials to sign off on essentially your concealed carry permit here. And what that means is, I don't mean just any government official anywhere. It would be equivalent in the US to trying to get something like, I think the equivalent would be about a GS5, maybe even a GS10, but it has to be a very high-ranking Afghan government official that is going to sign off on your carry permit or on your pistol permit. So if you want a pistol permit here, you have to get 2 government officials to sign off on it. And here's the catch. If anything happens, if there's a crime that happens with you and that handgun, if you use it in a self-defense role and it is found out it is not self-defense, those 2 government officials are just as liable as you, because technically they're supposed to have signed off on your character to carry that handgun, right? So it puts a lot of people in a jiffy, because this is one of the more dangerous parts in the region. I will not say Kabul's a war zone. There's nothing you haven't heard a single gunshot or IED since this video started, have you? And there's been multiple suicide attacks here. I haven't heard a single one of them, even though I've been living in this city day in and day out and just walking on the streets. I haven't heard any of them, all right? So that being the case, it's not a war zone, but it is a very dangerous part of town. It's a very dangerous part of the country, very dangerous part of the region. This is one of the places where you need to have a handgun, where businessmen and especially people who are interested in protecting their lives and their families really, really want handguns and really want rifles at home. But it's almost impossible to get one, unless, of course, corruption comes into play. And if you're able to bribe your way or find a corrupt official that's willing to sign off on you, that's something as well. But I haven't heard of that happening with a pistol permit. I've heard of that happening with other stuff, but not with a pistol permit. So when it comes to the black market here, you mostly have, your lower standard of firearms here is mostly sort of your Darais or your stuff from Pakistan that's handmade, right? That sort of goes into, Makarov from Dara goes around for about 300 to 400 US here. A legitimate Makarov from here, like a Russian or an East German or a Bulgarian, goes for something like 1,000 plus. A Beretta, you're looking at like 1,500, 2,000 for that sort of thing. This is the same thing in Iraq and in Yemen as well. If you've seen a bunch of my posts on TFB where I write about illicit firearms, illicit small arms in these countries, M4s in Yemen are going for something like several $1,000s. I'm talking just your basic Colts, nothing fancy, not an LWRC or anything like that. The price difference is very big here compared to the United States. So now that we've talked about those different markets a bit, I want to touch on something else. So I keep hearing, you know, Khyber Pass, Khyber Pass, Khyber Pass, and maybe I'm just a social justice warrior, or maybe I'm just, you know, out there on a limb. You people know I always like to pronounce things correctly in my videos as far as the languages of Pashto, Farsi, and Arabic are concerned. But calling a firearm a Khyber Pass firearm is essentially the same as calling a Colt Python a Interstate 95, because that's the route a Colt Python would have left out of the factory in Connecticut and then traveled somewhere to sell it. Okay, the reason why this Khyber Pass name is stuck is because Khyber Pass is about 20-30 miles from Dar Adam Khel, and all these, you know, handmade stuff, all this handmade stuff over the past 100 years, when it's traded and it comes into this country, it goes through the Khyber Pass, which was the same area that the British got annihilated in 1842. All right. What are they actually called, though? They're called darais. E is sort of like, you know, if you add an E to a word in Farsi, it becomes like a person. So the word for joke is like mazak. So someone who's a joker is like a mazaki, right? So a dara gun is a darai. And that's what they are known locally here. Nobody here calls them the Khyber Pass firearms. Nobody here calls them that, for anybody who's interested in the etymology of the word or where these firearms are from. Now, of course, there's other gun making places in Pakistan that make handmade stuff apart from Dar, but Dar is the most famous one, and that is where the name comes from because that's the most attributed to it. So another thing I want to touch on is something I've noticed here is there's a 100% complete lack of common sense, of knowledge, of education, and especially most importantly of safety when it comes to small arms. I don't know how many times I have been flagged here, to include walking down the street and an old dude putting away his concealed carry piece and literally racking the slide back and messing with it and pointing it directly at me as I'm walking down the road, completely oblivious to where the muzzle's direction is, right? I've handled firearms from people. I've said, hey, can I politely see your firearm? And they have given it to me with the muzzle end forward. Very unnerving when that happens to you. In talking about safeties, a lot of the Afghan policemen here, they have M16A4s on fire all the time. Less so with Kalashnikovs. I see that less so with that, but I still see it. What I do see with Kalashnikovs is that, you know, muzzles are just pointed in every direction whatsoever. There's sort of a universal condition 3 here, in that almost everybody here carries condition 3, whether it's army, police, private civilian, it doesn't matter. There's just such a lack of reliability in small arms in condition 1. Not a lack of reliability, but a lack of safety standards with realizing, you know, what they're using. Another part of that is that a lot of the firearms that they're using are extremely unreliable to begin with. We're talking about, you know, the darais, as I mentioned. We're talking about really old stuff, where if you were to carry condition 1, you know, you might actually have an office pop now and then, because the components and the firing pins are just so worn down. I was looking at a Makarov that you're going to see that a friend of mine let me examine, and you'll see that the firing pin is actually bent at the end. Like, this is the sort of reliability you're getting when it comes to these darais, right? The thing is, when you have a society that is lacking in proper education, that is lacking in stability, when you have a society that is lacking in a number of qualities that we take for granted in the West or in Europe, this is the kinds of stuff that you get. I'll give you a perfect example, right? Let's take crossing a road. Did you know there is not a single crosswalk in the entire city of Kabul? There's also not a single working traffic light that is obeyed by the folks on the road. In this entire city, there is no working traffic light. There's some, but no one obeys them. They just go right through them. So, you know how many times I've been in a car here and we've almost ghosted a kid running across the road? It's probably happened about 3 times with school children running across the road, and a couple times with bicycles where we almost hit a bicycle. Just, I'm talking slam on the brakes because this kid is about to get domed from the front car, almost hitting it, because he's trying to run across the road in full traffic across 6 lanes. Well, the same reason why there's no practical knowledge and education when it comes to small arms is also the same reason why people can't cross the road here. It's not because Afghans are just genuinely or pathetically stupid or backwards. That's not the reason at all. It's because the society is just so held back by everything that's happened to it, by the last 40 years of war, by everything that's been going on here. So when you apply that to small arms, you know, this is the kinds of stuff that you get. Very unfortunately, there's just an overall lack of education, overall lack of general knowledge here. On that point, what I want to say next is talking about a sort of mythology. So what happens when you get this lack of education, when you get this lack of, you know, sense, and you get this lack of understanding about small arms, understanding about safety, understanding how accuracy is, understanding how reliability works, understanding what proper safety measures are, you know, understanding basic tactical concepts that are very much for granted are very much available in the West. You get this sort of mythology that develops around these guns, which we have the same thing in the United States. I mean, you'll get Americans all day who are going to say, you know, 45 trumps 9, 45, shotguns in the home. Like, yeah, get that pump action for home defense. No one's going to start running away when you hear that, you know, pump hit home. Well, the same thing happens here, but the degree to which it happens makes the 9 versus 45 versus pump action shotguns for self-defense, it makes them pale in comparison, because people don't understand, you know, this is how rifling works. This is how you have to clean a firearm, from the front, from the rear to the front, so you want all the stuff going out. This is why you don't want to, you know, cycle your rounds constantly over again. In addition, another thing I really want to mention, there's no prac app here. There is zero practical application. Even within the forces that use firearms as part of their daily jobs, the ANA and the AUP, there's very little times that those guys actually get solid range time in and actually go to a range. You know, in a Marine Corps boot camp, I think recruits fire something like 500 rounds more like 200 or so over qual and pre-qual and then practice qual and all that stuff. But an Afghan soldier here will probably fire something like 50 or 60, even something insanely small like that. So, and with the security guards, it's even worse, because you get these guys who are just handed AKs, and it's like they just are expected to perform with them. They might know some rudimentary stuff, but there's no practical application. I saw a guy on the street with his keychains wrapped around the rear sight of his AK. Like, you see where I'm coming at from here? In addition, from other perspectives, I've seen AKs just, you know, being held about like just not treated like an actual weapon system, and treated just like, you know, pieces of wood and steel these dudes have to just slug around. But on this sort of mythology, right, this is interesting, because if you take this into account, looking at something like the Krink or the AKS-74U and how that name developed, you know, we've got Krink, we've got Krinkov, we've got Grinkov, we've got Shrinkov, we've got Shishkov, we've got Kalikov. These are all native Pashto names. You know, people from Logar, who I've talked to, it's a province near here, people from Logar don't know it as a Krinkov. They know it as a Shrinkov. Very different. They won't even recognize the word Krinkov. I've literally seen it happen where I've asked people from Logar, do you recognize this gun? And they say, oh, it's a Shrinkov. I don't know what a Krinkov is, right? So understanding this mythology that develops around these small arms, I can start to see why things like the Krinkov are actually not that surprising in this particular Afghan context, because you build up this sort of mythology around the zero practical application, you know, very limited education standards, even when it comes to just standard education standards, working with stuff that you're not very familiar with, and that kind of thing, and that it just builds up, and this is how you get almost mythical status attributed to a firearm that isn't even accurate past 100 meters. You know, and if we can talk about, you read some of my articles where I mentioned Soldier of Fortune, in 1981, a Krinkov, an AKS-74U, was worth the amount of 4 Dushka heavy machine guns. That ratio is just completely off here, but you can start understanding that sort of mythology when you realize, you know, there's no hard solid knowledge to go off of here. Everything is just sort of word of mouth and just sort of rumor when it comes to small arms. Oh, don't do this because this might happen. Oh, don't do this because that might happen. Again, we have this in the shooting industry in the States to some extent, but not to the extent that it is here. In addition, in America, it's checked at a number of different levels. I mean, you'll get vets coming back, you'll get LE officers coming back, and guys will teach classes. You know, knowledge will go in circles, and we'll talk about, okay, you know, this is what you shouldn't do with an AR. You know, this is a bad practice with carrying a holster. This is a very bad practice with working with an M4. This is a bad practice when doing this or that. And we start to learn about these habits, and those are disseminated and passed around, and it just cuts through the mythology cloud very quickly, because we're able to just have so much interaction with these things on a very professional, full-time, educated and learned basis. That doesn't happen here. There's no shooting range you can go to, you know, whip out your Glock and shoot off a couple rounds. There's no school you can go to take a course in defensive handgun tactics. There's no place you can go to get registered for a pistol permit. It's either you learn it from your buddies in the ANA or you learn it from your family growing up, maybe if you're in a rural side of the country, all right? Thanks guys for watching this video. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on to the channel.